Tuesday, September 17th, 2019. For the record, we have all city council members present with the exception of Councilor Brent Ellis, who is asked to be excused this evening. We also have members of the staff, and from the public, we welcome you here this evening. I've asked Councilor Mitchell if he would lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
If everyone will please stand and repeat the pledge after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This time we would like to take a moment of silence. As we take a moment of silence, we'd like to remember those who defend this great nation in our behalf and protect our many freedoms. We'd also like to remember our first responders, those who put their self in harm's way in our behalf. And we'd also ask you during the moment of silence to remember the city council members, that they might make good choices and decisions this evening that's in the best interest of the public. Now take a moment of silence. Thank you very much. Now have a period of time for public comment. This is an opportunity for you to come forward and address the city council regarding any concerns or ideas that you might have. When you come to the microphone, we would ask that you state your name and also that you limit your comments to about 3 minutes if you would. Just for your info, no action will actually be taken during the public comment. We just take those and work them. Those concerns you might have or ideas, and usually get back with you. So time is now yours for public comment. You just couldn't stay away, could you?
Should I let her go first, or she wanted to? Hi, Dave Leahy. Just want to bring something to your attention. That memorial out there, you know it's coming. Starting to crack. And I think since being a brand new memorial like it is, if the concrete was laid correctly, I don't think it should crack. How many cracks we got? I found one. I found 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 big cracks, 7, 8, 9, 10 cracks in the concrete out there on the corners across the middle. No way if you put the foundation down right on that, you put the frost bed in, you lay the concrete the way it's supposed to be, there's no reason that concrete should start cracking like that quick. We all know you can't lay concrete without cracks. We know that. I mean, it's going to crack eventually. How long has it been there? A month or 2 months? Month and a half? Should not be cracking like that. There's no way. So I just want to bring to your attention, and I don't know what we're going to do about it. I'm sure there's no warranty on concrete, but you have them come back out. Excuse me. Tacos. Have him come back out there and either cut that out and fix it, or just let it go and but what's going to happen is, you know, when a frost bed is not right, the water gets down there the minute the snow melts and the rains come and it freezes, and what does it do? It's going to really pop that stuff up. So what you want to do is try to nip this thing in the bud. I don't know if you're going to put a filler in a crack, if you can call him back out and have him fix it or what, but I don't know why it's cracking that quick. But I just wanted to bring it to your attention. Any questions or anything I found? Thank you.
Thanks, Dave, for that. Last count I heard was 2 cracks, so that's a lot more significant than what I heard.
Now it's 10. I just counted
Wow.
them coming in.
Wow.
I mean, some big cracks in that concrete. No way should that happen.
I would say that concrete is designed to crack. You put strike joints in them and you hope that the concrete will follow the strike joint to crack. But inherently it's going to crack. Why? Because it's wet going in, the water evaporates and it's going to shrink. You're going to have cracks in concrete. You try and plan for the best way along the strike joints that you know that they will crack and follow the strike joint. But being said, it's going to shrink as it dries, as that liquid dries out. And as it shrinks, I don't know if any of you have had maybe a bowl of pudding or something that you put in the fridge and it starts to dry on the top. What does it do? It shrinks and it's going to show fissures or cracks in the surface of that pudding or whatever you've got in the fridge if you don't properly cover it and keep the moisture in it. Same with concrete. Now you try and put strike joints where you think that it's going to crack and follow the strike joint. The cracks I've noticed are along the corner points of the monuments, the big heavy concrete monument that has the tiles and the pictures on it. That's where they're coming off. You could fill those with some type of filler, but inherently concrete is going to crack. That's just what it does. So we can do something with the cracks by filling them and securing the moisture from getting into them. But it's going to crack, and there will be more cracks as it continues to harden up and to dry.
No, we had a lot of concrete replaced a few years ago, and yeah, we got some cracks right early, and it's quite upsetting. The guy really did a great job. It looks really good, but it happened, and our city engineer, Scott Nelson, I talked to him about it, and just get some opinions and thoughts from him. But he said that he did give me tell me the name and type of a caulking filler they could put in those cracks. And they also put sealant, and they've already sealed it out here, but they do have a product, Roger, I know that Scott recommended
Flex Seal.
to put in those cracks. So
May I make another comment?
yeah,
I could understand, if there's a lot of weight on this concrete or a lot of traffic on it, but there's nothing been on it but just a few people walking at it now and then. And in addition, like Roger said, Mr. Worthing said, you're going to get the cracks at the corners, and that's where it's cracking at the corners. But also I'm looking, and now it's going right down the middle of the squares you put in. I mean, with no weight on it, why? I don't know. Does the sun crack it?
Yeah,
How come it only cracks a few?
I'm not stating that weight is cracking it. I'm saying that shrinkage, because the water evaporates. And when you pull water out of something, it's going to shrink. Just like you have an apple, you set it on the counter and the water dissipates out of the apple, it's going to shrink. It gets all leathery and wrinkled. Same thing with concrete. Concrete by its nature is going to shrink. That's the bottom line. You want to plan for it by having the strike joints where it will follow the strike joints and release that. But in some cases it doesn't, or you can't put a strike joint in an area where there's something already existing, and so that's off those corners is a challenge. We could certainly look at putting some Flex Seal in those. It will discolor and it's not very sightly. Obviously the concern with a crack is if it lifts up and you get a separation in elevation. That's the concern that would be there. If it's a crack that's minor and it's just a crack and it doesn't have a lift or separation, it probably is not going to be, a hazard. But if it separates and lifts, then you have a hazard. That's the issue.
I think we ought to look at it, though.
I do too. My driveway doesn't have cracks all over it, so yeah, I mean.
But again, I bet if you went to the strike joints and you looked in them, you'll see a crack in that strike joint. If you clean them out and you get the debris that's out of there, you'll see that strike joint, typically they're placed anywhere from 4 to 6 to 8 feet in some type of rectangular pattern. But if you look in those strike joints, I guarantee you'll see that concrete is actually separated.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is, but not the flat.
Yeah, not the lateral ones.
Yeah.
any other comments, council? Thank you, Mr. Leahy. Seeing no others, we'll move on next to presentations and reports. I've only got really one item tonight. Tomorrow night is our Meet the Candidate night. tomorrow evening. That's the candidates for the upcoming municipal election. That Meet the Candidate night will be held at the Senior Center. It'll be from 6 p.m. until 7:30 p.m. So everyone's invited to that. It was in our city newsletter, so the word should be out on that. So move on next. Is there anything from the city council, any committees that you serve on? Any? Okay. Move on to the city administration report, Mr. Worthen.
Mayor Searle, thank you. Council, in your packet this evening is the monthly administrative report for the month of August. You'll note on there in our FTE that we're continue to be obviously under our 2005 authorized full-time staffing by 1.25 employees. That's in your packet. We also conveyed to you the department reports in there. If there are any questions on that, I would like to note our city attorney, Steve Brooks. He's not here tonight, but just some of the difficult issues that Steve deals with, the challenges that he works with. He also oversees our justice court, as well as the drug court facilities here in Riverdale. Riverdale is one of the few remaining entities that operates a drug court, which is a good service to those persons that have those challenges and addictions in their lives, and appreciate his oversight of that. He's also working on replacing Judge Renstrom, who was hired as a district court judge here in Weber County, and that process is ongoing. We've narrowed it down from 12 candidates down to 6, down to 3. So that justice court judge position will soon be filled here, and just like to point out Steve's work and thank him for his work here at Riverdale City. As far as our August anniversaries go, we have 2 that are on their 5-year points of service. They're not here with us this evening. They're both in Rich Taylor's Community Services Department. Most of you know Karen Dill over at the Civics or Community Center. She has 20 years of service. I'd like to congratulate her on that. We do have their certificates here for her, as well as for Betty Wilson over in our Community Services Department over at the Recreation Center. She has 5 years of service. So those are our 2 5-year anniversaries on our agenda this evening. Unfortunately, they're not with us tonight. I would also like to make public comment and thank Colleen Wiegert, again, at our community service, has 16 years. That's quite a long time. Colleen and Karen are like regulars over at the community center. So congratulations to Colleen. She's not with us this evening as well. Raylan Bowman in our business administration department has 6 years. Sam Smith in community services, again, at the community center, has 4 years. Sam does a lot of work over there. I'd like to appreciate him. Ryan Bailey, we hired Ryan from the South Ogden Police Department. He has 3 years of service. He's a detective in our police department. Matthew Guyman in our public works has 2 years of service. Camille Jacobson, I call her Cammy, up front, you see her in the afternoons. Business administration department has 2 years. Hannah Rose Taylor in our community services works with Rich Taylor, has 2 years of service. Jordan Bennett has 1 year of service, again, in our community services department. And then finally, Captain Garrett Henry, you met him maybe here a few months ago when he was hired in our fire department. When he was promoted to captain, excuse me. But Garrett has 1 year of service in our fire department. And then, of course, lastly, our community development report is there with you. It lists a few businesses that are looking forward to coming into Riverdale City. Zhao Asian Cafe. The Quick Quack Car Wash is beginning to mobilize. You can see that as you drive out today on 700 there on Riverdale Road. The Brookhaven building, Mike mentioned today in our weekly meeting with the mayor. The Brookhaven office park is ongoing. They're beginning to do the wall framing on the exterior, I think you said, Mike, of the building. They've got the structural steel in place. So that's kind of an imposing mass you see up there in the West Bench area up by the Motel 6 building. So that's a good thing to have in our community. So the businesses that will be in that building and the jobs that it will bring will be very beneficial to Riverdale City and the West Bench. That's all I have, Mayor.
Any questions or comments on the report? Okay, we'll move on to the consent items. We have one consent item tonight that's consideration to approve the meeting minutes from August 20th for both the city council work session and city council regular session. Do we have any changes or comments down here? Can we have a motion on the minutes?
Motion to approve the consent items?
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Unanimous in favor. Move on next to the action items. Action item number 1, consideration of ordinance 912, amending the swimming pool setback standard. Mr. Eggett.
Thank you, Mayor. Just as a quick history on this one and following your executive summary, Mike Lawton was the individual that during the public commentary session of the City Council meeting on July 16th approached the council talking about Title 10, Chapter 14, Section 11 regarding swimming pool ordinances. And during that, he asked the city to reevaluate the setback requirement found in that section for a location swimming pool on a residential dwelling lot, in this case, obviously his own personal lot. His request was to change the rear yard setback from 7 feet to 5 feet from any interior property line. At the conclusion of that meeting, we then brought it back to the council for a brief consent discussion, and it was asked to go to the Planning Commission for review. It did go to the Planning Commission on August 13th. The matter was set for public hearing at that time and calendared for a public hearing on August 27th. The notice went out in accordance with state code. All public hearing requirements were fulfilled for that meeting, and there were no public comments provided prior in the form of writing or during the meeting in the form of verbal public commentary. At the conclusion of the public commentary in that meeting on the 27th, the Planning Commission discussed the matter and the amended swimming pool ordinance request for the 7 foot to 5 foot. They made a small change relative to the wording of how the measurement would be established to the water's edge, which is consistent with what you would see in some of the other ordinances from neighboring cities. So they liked that language, and it made it clear for any building official in the future should the ordinance be changed. And they at that point forwarded it on to the city council for final approval consideration with a supporting recommendation from the Planning Commission, as you have written in your packet at this time. Therefore, the change would be an amended change to Title 10, Chapter 14, Section 11, specifically in this case, Item A of that code. For the purposes of context, I did go and talk to, I did request from the department heads of the city relative to this, the rationale as to why 7 foot was the interior setback number. If there was just a random number, if it had some context. I didn't get a lot of guidance. Intuitively, it seemed to be that the public utility easement historically in many subdivisions was set more at a 7 foot standard, and this could have been a redundant application of that 7 foot public utility easement standard and mirrored well on top of it. That seemed to be the strongest rationale for it. There was some discussion maybe a nuisance, maybe just 7 foot was a nice buffer to not create a nuisance to a neighboring property owner in both directions. You get a 14-foot buffer versus a 10-foot buffer. And even our building official talked about how maybe if you had any trenching equipment, there might be some sloughing or problems in trenching. However, in current context, developments these days don't really do public utility easements in the rear yard in newer developments. They're usually along the front or along the side. You'll get 2 of the 4 sides. Whereas in older developments, you get along 3 or even all 4 sides, because that's how utilities used to be established. Ironically, we don't have a requirement that a public utility easement be 10 foot or 7 foot. It's just what the context of the builders have decided. 10 foot now has become the standard again, but then they obviously put it all in one location or 2 locations and just make it wider so it accommodates everybody that needs to be there. In the case of Mr. Lawton's concern or any other concerns where there is a public utility easement, even if you read the code as currently established, the public utility easement trumps the interior property line location regardless. So when there is a public utility easement, that has to be vacated before you could even put a pool where it's at, or obviously you could only put a pool right up to that public utility easement, and we would measure that as part of any request for a public or a swimming pool establishment on the property. And I did have the same conversation with the planning commission. The only other thing I note that I did is I did research the neighboring communities. I did call into South Ogden City and Washington Terrace due to Mr. Loughton's comment regarding some of the comments he had received from his installer that he was preferring to do for his pool, and the installer told him that those cities had recently gone through a review of their codes reflective of a change to 5 feet. South Ogden had not made that change. They remain at 10 feet to the water's edge is how they measure. However, Washington Terrace back in 2015, the end of the year, did make that change. There was a dialogue from a resident to the mayor, and then the mayor requested that it be looked at, and it was changed at that time to 5 feet. Roy City does still have they do also have a setback of 5 feet from all property lines in their rear or side yard. And the only stipulation to that is a minimum of 15 feet from any dwelling on adjacent property. It's kind of like a secondary where I guess you do a measurement at that point, again, maybe from an ordinance compliance as far as nuisance. I'm not quite sure, but that may be the rationale there. And then Ogden City just kept it strictly at 10 feet, like South Ogden. So that's pretty much what the findings are. You'll see in your document thereafter what the new language would look like with the recommendation from the Planning Commission, and then the public hearing notice information showing the 27th was noticed. And then finally, ordinance number 912. The only thing I would ask is if 912 was approved, that we just amend the date for the public hearing from August 13th to August 27th as part of a motion. And I would defer back to the council for any questions or comments that may be had, Mayor.
Thank you. Any comments, questions? We talked about it pretty good upstairs.
I'll say what if I could, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, sure.
When this was first brought up, I was quite interested as to the rationale as to why those particular numbers, and typically those types of things are done with geotech studies, and you would think they would be anyway. Yeah. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. Maybe they're brought up because they're a round number. I don't know. But having lived in this city for 25 years, I became aware of a scenario. I think it initiated about 20 years ago. And I had a lengthy conversation with, I called up, reached out to one of the parties involved. Well, the party involved, Alan Gibby. And with his permission, I asked him if I could convey his comments from that conversation I had with him, and he granted permission. Now, I became aware of this through the neighbor in his backyard. Now, he has wanted to put in a pool. He actually owns 3 lots, and he built his house on 3 lots where he lives, and where they wanted to put the pool. At that time, the setback was 10 feet, and he wanted to put in this pool, and it didn't meet that 10 foot, just barely. And so he looked around, and some of the other municipalities in North Davis and Weber County. By the way, there's 15 municipalities in Weber County, and you cited 3, and that's...
4 and us.
Oh,
Our
okay.
surrounding communities.
Okay, surrounding community. That's right, Ogden. That's right. But there's some. He did a little bit bigger survey, and there was a movement of changing it to 7 feet, and so he put forth through the city officials, through the planning commission, going through all of the formal avenues to change it to 7 feet, because it would meet his requirement to put in the pool if it were 7 feet, and it wouldn't be changed. And this was like a 1.5 year process. And so what he ended up doing is he contacted the neighbor behind him, which was a gentleman named Brian Cherry, who has moved, and they worked out an arrangement. He bought 4 feet of property, so it extended his property line. He had the surveyor come in, and it was recorded on the county plot map. So now he had the setback of 10 feet, and he put in his pool. Now, for him, that was a lot of work. It was over a 1.5 year process, and there was some additional out-of-pocket expenses just to meet this ordinance, because the city would not change from 10 feet to 7 feet. Now, and I asked him, why was it 10 feet? And he said, well, from what his understanding was, and looking around, was what you brought up, was the public utility easement that are required. And he even went so far as to, and again, I don't know who he talked to, he didn't elaborate to that depth, because some of this goes back almost 20 years, was they only needed 7 feet would give them the accesses that they would need if they should need to go back into that. And anyway, he got his pool. Shortly thereafter, within a couple of years of his putting in the pool, there were some other residences in Riverdale who asked, and I guess things happen in trends. And so the trend was, as other municipalities were changing from 10 to 7 feet, and he said that he was approached because Riverdale was apprehensive about changing it because of all the grief that they put him through and denying him that he would turn around and sue him. So he said, no, I'm not going to do that, and signed off on it. So then that's why we have the 7 foot now as opposed to 10 feet. So a little historical perspective there. And since he was so heavily involved, he was naming names and events and what he did in a lot of clarity and a lot of detail. Now, one of the things in the conversation that was noted was how many of the people that he cited by name have moved. In fact, his neighbor that he bought the property from has moved. And that house has since changed twice. And the other people who petitioned within a couple of years after to put in a pool, which they did after they changed the setback to 7 feet, they've moved, or in one case has passed on. And so it's, the point is that when you change an ordinance like this, it goes with the property, not the individual, because that property is going to be there long after the individual has, they're going to use it for a time. Maybe they'll be there for 20, 30 years, 40 years maybe, but that property will be there much longer. And so when you make these considerations, it needs to be considered for the property, the future owners, and the future neighbors to that. That's all. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mitchell.
I just wanted to thank Mr. Eggett for putting in the time to look into this and for working through it with the Planning Commission. I really like to see us do things that make it so the property owners can use their property the way that they want to. Anytime we move in the direction that allows someone to do what they want with their property, I think is a step in the right direction. We have to be careful. I like your thoughts as far as if there's a public utility back there, well, then it's not going to happen. But if there's not, I can't see any reason why you couldn't have a pool up to 5 feet within your property line. I mean, the lots these days are not as big as they once were. And I mean, if he wants to have a pool and 5 feet is going to make it work, then he owns the property. I say, who are we to tell him you can't put in a pool within 5 feet? But 7 feet's okay, but 5 feet, that's just not going to work. And so I appreciate the research you've done and the time you put into it and the thoughtfulness. I can tell you've thought a lot about it. And if you could give us a good reason not to do it, then I would be all, I would have a good reason. But if we don't have a good reason, then I really want to say, hey, people should be able to put a pool in. So.
And that's, you echoed the rationale of the planning commission to come to the decision they came to when they advanced the recommendation. What you just said is that where they ended up.
Mr. Arnold?
I think one of the things we got to remember too is the people who've moved. There's people that live there now that actually walked in, surveyed the property, said, I like that or I don't like that. It's like a bar in the kitchen or not. A pool, if it's 5 feet, they don't like it, they won't buy the house. But somebody will buy it. So,
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Arnold?
I'll move to approve ordinance 912. Oh, right. Amending the swimming pool setback standard with the changes that Mr. Eggett has requested, with the public hearing being on August 27th instead of the 13th.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion, we have a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? Ms. Evans, would you poll the council, please?
Councilmember Mitchell,
Aye.
Councilmember Arnold,
Aye.
Councilmember Hazen,
Aye.
Councilmember Stevens.
Nay.
Okay, 3 in favor, 1 opposed. The motion carries. Move on next to discretionary items. Is there any discretionary business for the city council meeting?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Well, that was quick.
Well, nobody was saying
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. City council meeting's adjourned. We'll move into our RDA meeting next. I'd like to welcome you this evening to our Riverdale City RDA Board meeting, being held on Tuesday, September 17th, 2019. You'll have to excuse me. Okay. Don't have a paper copy of the RDA. I had to use the iPad, so have a period of public comment next. You're welcome to come forward to the RDA board, share any concerns or ideas that you might have with the RDA board. We would ask you to limit your time to about 3 minutes, and please state your name. Seeing none, excuse me, I didn't mention we have all RDA board members here with the exception of Mr. Ellis, who's been excused this evening. Move on next to the consent items. We have one consent item. That's the consideration to approve the meeting minutes on July 16th, the RDA meeting held on that evening. Do we have any changes or corrections to those minutes? Seeing none, do we have a motion on the consent item?
Motion to approve the consent items.
Second.
Have a motion, we have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? It's unanimous in favor of the minutes. Moving on to the next item, it's an executive closed session. And we're going to close this session pursuant to the provisions of Section 52-4-205 of the Open and Public Meetings Law for the purpose of discussing the purchase, exchange, or lease of real property. Do we have a roll call vote to do that?
Motion.
Motion
Move
to
to
do-
go into executive session.
Second.
Okay. Have any discussion on the motion? Ms. Evans, will you poll the council on the motion, please?
Councilmember Mitchell,
Aye.
Councilmember Arnold?
Aye.
Councilmember Hanson?
Aye.
Councilmember Stevens?
Aye.
Okay, it's unanimous in favor. Thank you. We're now going into a closed executive session, so we'll need to excuse the public this evening. We thank you for being here. Thanks. Shaylee, would you make sure the live stream is
And compliance.
turned off? Okay.
Aren't you?